Welcome to a historic walking tour of the business section of Russellville, Kentucky. This tour has been a feature of the annual Tobacco and Heritage Festival, usually held each fall. I am Evelyn Richardson, a lifelong resident of Logan County, retired from a career as regional librarian. I have a deep appreciation for our history and for the persons who have preserved it for us to enjoy. Kentucky became a state in June of 1792, and Logan County was formed from Lincoln County later that same year. Russellville was named for Colonel William Russell, Revolutionary War soldier of Virginia, who was given a grant of 2,000 acres of land near Russellville. Former names were Big Boiling Spring, Gasper Butcher's Spring or Station, Cook's Spring, and Logan Courthouse, called that because legal cases for all of Western Kentucky were heard and tried here. Russellville was incorporated in 1810, and by 1870, it was said to be the third most important business and industrial town in Kentucky. The park has always been where it is today, in the center of town, and it was the center of activity. A pond was there for watering horses. In 1798, Henry Russell, son of Colonel William, was a trustee of Russellville, and he ordered a stray pen to be constructed in the park to corral stray cows and other animals that got out of backyards. People checked here first for their lost livestock. Two courthouses have stood in the park, one on the south end, actually referred to as the marketplace, which was built about 1801, and the second on the north side, built in 1826. Pictures of the 1826 courthouse show the fish weather vane on top. A replica of the weather vane is atop the historic 1904 courthouse, one block west of the square. The original has been preserved. The Farmer's Friend newspaper office was in the southwest room of the South Courthouse. This Russellville newspaper was the first to carry the notice of the death of explorer Meriwether Lewis in Tennessee, as noted on one of the historical markers in the park. Theodore Roosevelt spoke on the public square when he was running for vice president in 1900. Court Day was held on the square every first Monday, as was true of other towns in Kentucky. Pictures show it crowded with wagons, buggies, and people. During the Civil War, Union General Stephen Butcher, it was his nickname, Burbridge, ordered 2 guerrillas shot on the public square, and the merchants were forced to close their doors and witness the shooting. However, it is said that many locked their doors but went out the back and would not watch. A sidewalk once encircled the park but was removed, and the park's size was shrunk to make parking space for automobiles when they came along. A snow scene gives a good view of Main Street. Today, several memorials and historical markers in the park highlight Logan County's history. Examples are John Littlejohn, famous preacher, the Confederate Convention held here in 1861, and Alice Allison Dunnigan, noted African-American teacher, journalist, and civil rights leader. A gazebo on the south side of the park was the center of a gathering for the 1915 Dixie Highway Barbecue, held annually in a different town along that major north-south highway. The Harrison Height building, present home of the Chamber, overlooks the park. On Christmas Eve, 1902, Thomas Harrison's young daughter watched from a second-floor window as boys shot out the windows of the courthouse with firecrackers and cherry bombs. A new 1904 courthouse on the block west was already planned. Many different businesses have occupied: casket factory, grocery store, livery stable, boarding of railroad people, furniture store, and WPA sewing classes were taught upstairs during the Great Depression. In 1926, W.T. Height opened the first service station in town. The building was modified to create a canopy under which the gas pumps were installed. Also on the south side of the square have been, among others, modern dry cleaners operated by Robert Hardy, city offices, and the police department. Here in another photograph, we see City Hall getting a facelift. On the west side of the square, the first building we see was a hardware store for most of its existence since 1873. In the 20th century, Mr. Bob Wilson sold case tractors, farm implements, and furniture. Ruston Flowers later also operated a hardware store there, and he sold the building to the News Democrat and Leader in the 1970s. The Mirror, Western Kentucky's oldest newspaper, was the News Democrat's ancestor. You can read the first issue of the Mirror, published in 1806, on microfilm at the Logan County Public Library. The office building on the corner of West 4th, facing the square, was a former Gulf service station. We must mention on this business tour that a Coca-Cola bottling plant operated one block around the corner on Winter Street. Its sign says, "Drink Coca-Cola in bottles." You will see 2 hotel buildings and sites of 4 more on the business tour. BB&T Bank is on the site of the Forst House Hotel, built by Englishman and cabinet maker William Forst. In later years, it was called Parkview and then Cane Tuck. It was torn down in 1966 to build a new Southern Deposit Bank, previously located across the park on the southeast corner of East 4th and Main. The Gray Hotel was on the east corner of the block occupied today by Riley White Drugs. Federal troops used it as headquarters during the Civil War. In the 20th century, it housed a number of businesses, including the Lottie Fallin Edna Crosland Hat Shop. Other businesses on the north side of the square have included a barber shop, insurance agency, cafe, and newspaper. On the west side have been Ideal Drugstore, the post office, a movie theater, Young's Department Store, and others. Kroger was on the west corner of Riley White's block until it built a new store where Crabtree Furniture is today. Then Ben Franklin 5 and Dime Store occupied that corner site. We now cross the parking lot between Riley White and Crabtree to 3rd Street. All Russellville streets were named until 1915, when the mail system decreed east-west streets be numbered to facilitate mail delivery. 3rd Street's original name was North Street, then Pearl Street, and was nicknamed Jockey Alley because you could always find trading, jockeying going on there. Knives, mules, dogs, just about anything you could find. First Monday Court Day was officially moved to West 3rd Street when the congestion grew around the square. Here we see a garden produce market, a much quieter and later scene. Some businesses on 3rd have been Bob Collins' blacksmith shop on this site, tobacco warehouses. We see here wagons ready to unload, and then cars came along waiting for sale day. There were also businesses like Tommy Higgins Cafe that moved from the square to the corner of West 3rd, a stockyard, and Houchin's Grocery on Market Square and 3rd in more recent years. Continuing north, we come to West 2nd Street. 2nd Street's official name was Barclay Street, And First Street was Sanders, by the way, nicknamed Canal because of the deep ditches along the way. At the west end of 2nd Street was the depot. It was first located near where North Main crosses the railroad. Now vacant is Swift Milk and Cheese Plant. Next, McCarley Richardson Mill that made eiderdown flour and Ballard feed. It is now a Daryville feed mill. The corner of 2nd and Main is a significant spot. Here was a big spring that gave the town its first names: Cook's Spring, Big Boiling Spring, and others that we mentioned. Evidence of that underground spring existed until Town Creek was cleaned out to better carry the water away. Flooding occurred with nearly every rain. However, the spring was the water supply that allowed the town to be built here. Main Street was a buffalo trail that led to this spring. Up the rise to the south on the east side of Main was built the first permanent dwelling, 1790, by William Cook and his wife and William Stewart, who was age 18. Stewart became deputy sheriff, deputy surveyor, and guide and scout in the War of 1812. Stewart wore buckskin, and a painted portrait of him holding his powder horn is at the library. Remains of a cane shelter or two were found by Cook, but whoever built them had moved on before 1790. The second permanent house was built in 1791 by the Talbot family near where the Gray Hotel later stood, referred to earlier on the Riley White block. The apartment house we see here on 2nd and Main was built as the Model Hotel. Across Main from it on the corner was Bert's Market, later Bob's Market grocery store in the 1940s and 50s era. Father and son, Bert and Bob Murphy, were owners and managers. This clinic is now on that side. There were tobacco warehouses on both sides of North Main toward the railroad track. One was burned by the night riders during the tobacco wars. A photograph of it smoldering the next morning can be seen at the library. Russellville was noted for having the largest one-sucker market in the world. Turning south now to return to the square, on the lot of the Carpenter Center was located our biggest early industry, Logan Manufacturing, later named Red Cap, and we called it the Sewing Factory. The Chamber of Commerce was incorporated in 1943, and it worked to get a garment plant to make clothes for the war industry. A tobacco warehouse belonging to J.W. Murray's father was bought by Clay Franklin and converted to the factory that opened in 1944. It was the first opportunity for women to work at this type of job, and they were glad to contribute to the war effort in this way. Industry began to grow in Russellville. The State Highway Garage, torn down in 1977, was directly across Main Street from the sewing factory. Next to it was an old building that burned after being purchased by DDI Engineering. It once housed an early hospital. On the west side of Main, before getting to the Gable Hotel, was a pool room and the popular Perry's Restaurant owned by Elvis Perry, not to be confused with Perry's Drugstore on the next block south. On the corner of 3rd and Main is the Gable Hotel, now home of DDI Engineering, built in 1948 by Wooten Stewart. Moore Insurance is another converted service station across Main Street. Klein's business began in 1905 as a gun-making shop. The family later owned a men's clothing store and other businesses. The Klein building that burned and was rebuilt was where Coon's 5 and dime store was located for the longest period of time. It first opened where the shop on the square is today, moved to the Klein building in 1936, moved directly across to the west side of Main in 1963, and then it closed in 1979. Hancock's, that owned the building, kept their lunch counter and the toy basement open for several years. The southwest corner of 3rd and Main is known as Cooksey's Corner. Gaines Cooksey, a colorful figure, owned a grocery store on that corner for many years. His advertisements in the local paper were often political ads or commentaries on a current issue more than they were prices of his products. In the early years on 3rd Street was the Golden Eagle Tavern and Russellville Hotel or Tavern. It's written that court was held at one of these tavern establishments in the early 1800s. Across Main Street, we see the east side of the business district leading to the square. First Southern National Bank, previously named Citizens National, owns 6 original storefronts, including at one time Leadham's Clothing, Andrew's Drugstore, now a Courtyard after a fire, and Western Auto. Perry's Drugstore in this stretch was one of the oldest businesses in Kentucky. Opening in 1837, it was sold out of the Perry family to Jack Carver in 1969, and it closed in 1987, 150 years of business. The Courier-Journal carried a feature article about its history upon its closing. A northeast corner of East 4th and Main, where the buildings have now been removed, is best remembered as the location of Duncan's Drugstore. A Sanborn fire insurance map dated 1909 shows the Bank of Russellville where Duncan's was. In a 1905 newspaper, The Critic, we read of Garrettson Jeweler located on Center Street, which is now 4th Street, back of the Bank of Russellville. The newspaper was located in the Ryan building over the Bank of Russellville at one time. It's impossible to trace all the occupants. At one early time, Cumberland Wilson had a book bindery at this location. An old photo shows the Liberty Cafe in the left-hand side of this corner building facing Main. A row of shops behind this building was known as Gray's Row, a rare example of a forerunner to today's strip malls. One housed the retail business of Andrew Caldwell, who made leather products in the saddle factory 2 blocks east. In later years, the sweet shop was a popular eating place in this row, as well as location of an optometrist's office and a beauty shop. On the southeast corner of East 4th and Main was the Southern Deposit Bank. It was a direct descendant of the Southern Bank of Kentucky of Jesse James gang robbery fame. While at this location, a wall mural depiction of the robbery was painted by artist Bernard Wiley of Tennessee. It was on panels and was satisfactorily moved across the park to the new bank building that we saw at the beginning of the tour. In the general area behind Southern Deposit Bank in the early days was a nail factory owned by William Norton. A storefront building adjacent to the back of the Southern Deposit Bank and facing East 4th Street was owned by the Byrne family and was the location of the public library before it moved upstairs on the corner of 5th and Main in 1942. Prior to the building's demolition, this 4th Street place housed a beauty shop. Phelps Hotel, due east, was built in the 1950s. It became Logan Arms Apartments and was torn down in 1991 to create the parking lot by the theater. In 1912, Arthur Mitchell came from Alabama and opened a picture show in the Opera House on South Main. Then he was in a building on the west side of the square. He built his own Dixie Theater on East 4th across from the present theater. He was in the movie business for a total of 40 years. Shortly after Mitchell's death, the Dixie burned, and the lot was sold by his wife to Houchins Markets, and their first store in their own building in Russellville was constructed on the site. Houchins was previously located on South Main near the square. In 1948-49, Charlie Bowles built Logan Theater across the street, the present building. Bowles also operated a drive-in movie on the Nashville Road, the Jesse James Drive-In. There was an explosion in the Logan Theater in 1971 and it burned. It was rebuilt and named the Village Cinema. The Russellville Electric Plant Board is built on a lot owned by the Andrews family. A beautiful home was torn down for this to happen. The east addition to the plant board is on the site of the bus station. Bill Fuqua's father, Taylor Fuqua, and others of the family owned the Fuqua bus line that traveled regular routes from Bowling Green to Hopkinsville. Bill sold the lot to the Electric Plant Board. Travel and delivery of merchandise were very dependent on the bus line. The block just east of the Electric Plant Board was the center of manufacturing industries in early Russellville. Known to have been there were the old stone jail, blacksmith shop, wagon works of Reagan and Sons, rope factory, brewery, cabinet makers, and coffin maker shop. The Heiss family well on that block for a number of years furnished that end of town with the purest of water. The saddle factory, built about 1817 and owned by brothers Andrew and David Caldwell, is believed to be the oldest industrial building in Kentucky that is still standing. Made there were saddles for the U.S. Army and saddles for individuals, shoes, and other leather products. A tan yard was near Town Creek behind the factory. Indentured servants lived on the third floor, and there were inscriptions on the ceiling. One reads, May 13th, 1828, free 2 years from today. Miss Fanny Bowden later conducted a private school in the saddle factory building. The office of dentist, Dr. Dale Clark, is on the site of the large Elijah Heiss house, built around 1804. Reverend Valentine Cook, a famous preacher, taught Elijah Heiss. He was very interested in politics by age 16. He was elected to the Kentucky legislature in 1829, was an intellectual, eccentric political figure, Chief Justice of Kentucky, elected to Congress, and a prominent member of the bar. He married Elvira Stewart, daughter of early settler Major William Stewart, referred to earlier. Heiss killed himself in the house. His home served many purposes, notably a boarding house for girls who were attending Russellville Academy and a meeting place for various legal affairs. Tom Noe, local attorney, is currently writing a book on the life of Elijah Heiss. Going south on Summer Street, we see the Breathitt Moorhead House, built by Governor John Breathitt in 1813 for his sister. Her husband was Dr. John Sappington, who believed that quinine was a cure for malaria, but few believed that he was right at that time. They moved west to another state. Charles Moorhead, who was governor of Kentucky, lived in the house at one time. A private boys' school was located there in the mid-1800s, and it became the home of local artist Miss Robbie McLean, especially noted for painting coats of arms. Simmons Nursing Home on the corner of 5th and Summer was where a lot of babies in the mid-1900s were born. On 5th Street is the home of Governor John Breathitt, now owned by the Russellville Rotary Club that holds its weekly luncheon meetings there. An historic marker is in front. He was one of the 4 Russellvillians who served as governor of Kentucky. Homes of all 4 of these governors are still standing: John Breathitt, James T. Moorhead, John J. Crittenden, and Charles S. Moorhead, whose home we just saw. Governor Breathitt is buried on his farm north of town. Memorials to him also are in Maple Grove Cemetery and in Frankfort. The next brick building west was built by Governor Breathitt as his office. The northeast corner building on 5th and Main has housed many different tenants over the years, including the office of Dr. J.P. Glenn before he moved to his new office on the next block west on 5th Street. The Opera House is described on the printed walking tour brochure that guides you through the residential section of town. Thank you for watching this virtual historic walking tour through a few blocks of the business section of Russellville. Be sure to check out a similar virtual tour that takes you from the square south through the residential section.